Hello, everybody. Barry Johns here. Welcome back to another edition of Studio Talk. Today we're going to talk about, in today's age in 2021, do we still have a need for DSP-based solutions for recording audio? That's the question. When you think about how fast computers have gotten, over the last few years especially, and you tack on top of the fact that many plug-in manufacturers have made their plugins really efficient, really low latency, non-heavy DSP based for the most part. And then when you look at features like freeze tracks and things like that have been in DAWs for quite some time now, it begs the question, do I need a DSP-based solution in our project studios? Now, I think when it comes to major studios and things like that, I think there's definitely no question about it, a need for DSP in those situations. But what about for guys like me and guys like you out there, guys and girls, by the way? Is that something that we need today? Well, when you look at the fact, it's interesting when you think about it. Well, wait a minute here. Let me kind of touch one subject before we get going. I want to encourage, because I know the way some of you think about DSP-based solutions, because I've seen quite a few comments and in several of my videos, and so I want to pose a question to you. In your project studio, let's say you're convinced that under no circumstances does anybody need DSP anymore. That's old school stuff. Everything's more than powerful enough for you in your workflow. I would ask you to consider maybe not thinking just because something works for you that it necessarily is going to apply to everyone else. We all have different needs. Many of us are recording different types of things. We're recording in different types of situations. We want certain types of flexibility and things like that. So before you just write off for everybody out there that you've made the decision that nobody needs DSP, so therefore if you don't need it, nobody needs it, I would encourage you maybe to rethink that thought process, because I know some of you out there have that. And so for many people, there is no need, and probably with the way they work, there probably will be no need for any type of DSP solution. But when you think about it, especially the more higher end you get up in your converters, and now it's even on lower end converters, the ability to record with low latency or no latency has been around for quite some time. And that's where basically a lot of interfaces have made the ability to be able to take what is on the microphone inputs and automatically put that out to the headphone jack really before it goes out to the DAW. And so, but the only downside to that is if it just does that and nothing else, you obviously can't track through any type of plugins. And depending on what you're tracking, that's most likely not a problem. I think where it becomes a problem for sure is if you're tracking vocals, or any type of thing that requires the player to get in an atmospheric kind of mode. Maybe you've got a really ambient guitar sound that you want to be able to have on the final recording, but you want to do that with plugins. You don't want to track with that. Well, in a situation like that, that's where it's beneficial to be able to track through plugins as you go. And so, anyway, you've got the ability out there, and we've had that for quite a long time, where you can track with no latency, just not through any plugins. Now, over the last few years, especially, a lot of interface manufacturers out there, whether it be Antelope, even PreSonus does it now. They're not really high end, but PreSonus does it now. You've got Apogee, gives you the ability to do it. RME, and so many others. Of course, Universal Audio, but we'll get to that in just a second. A lot of those interface manufacturers are enabling you to be able to have onboard DSP within their interface. So you can, in fact, track through compression, EQ, and then most of them include some basic fundamental time-based effects, whether it's delay or reverb. And so they're incorporating those into their interfaces. Many of them will just come with it complimentary. Others, it's an upsell for them. They kind of get you started. I know Antelope does some of that. And certainly the only reason you really jump into UAD for the most part is to get access to their plugins. So of course you've got that there, on their Apollo interfaces. So then of course you've got the old standard Pro Tools. I think HDX is out of the budget for just about everybody, or most people probably watching my show, this channel, I should say. If you don't know or not, back over there, I've got a Carbon that I recently bought. It has onboard DSP processing on it. And that's probably on the high end that most people are probably not going to spend more than $4,000 on an interface. I think you start to get into a certain, a certain smaller group of project studios that get into that over $2,000 interface kind of situation. So, but certainly, you can debate whether or not something like that's worth it. There's arguments to be made that there is, but but they may not be right for you. So when you think about DSP, I think today, it is certainly still relevant today. And so what are some of the things that would cause you to need or desire a DSP type solution in your project studio? So obviously, if you track and you mix as you go, and then you get your inspiration to add other instruments or other parts to a song, but you've already got a lot of plugins. Maybe you've already got some virtual instruments instantiated. You want to be able to punch in at any time and do it through anything, any type of sound you want, whether it's any type of a plugin. That might be, kind of a CPU hog as an example. Obviously, many plugins you can track through fine, no problem. But where you get into a problem is when you get into higher buffers. And so, if you want to record with really low latency, I think depending on the interface, depending on the type of connection, whether it's old school USB or USB 3 or USB-C, obviously Thunderbolt, of course, various. I think we're up to Thunderbolt 3, going to Thunderbolt 4. So all of those ultimately allow the ones and zeros to get in and out of the computer faster. So depending on what type of interface you have, you may need to go down to a 32 buffer or a 64 buffer. Some of you, like with Pro Tools Native, I could track perfectly fine with a 128 buffer, and it seemed for the most part good to me as I was tracking. But the minute you start putting a lot of heavy, intensive plugins, mostly time-based type plugins, or ones that really drain the CPU, and certainly when you get into to start putting virtual instruments in play, whether that's synthesizers, samplers, or whether it's like Steven Slate drums, or or something along those lines, Superior Drummer 3. Or whatever version you have, Easy Drummer, any of those, those can eat up the resources of a computer quite quickly. And so if you want to be able to track and you've already got all those going, it may be hard for you, depending on how powerful your computer is, whether or not you can maintain a low buffer like that or not. You may find that you have to increase that buffer to be able to do that. And then that would obviously, if that's the case, would force you into having to do some of the workarounds. Now, some of the workarounds are like freeze tracks, things like that, or low latency monitoring as an example, I talked about before. But then you're not tracking through plugins. And if you feel like you need to be able to do that, and many of us do, I know I certainly do all the time. And so not everything, by the way, but I do that depending on what I'm recording at the time. You have to have some type of workaround, of that nature. So I'm not a fan of freezing tracks. I don't like anything that slows me down. I don't want to have to stop, freeze something just so I can drop my buffer down and then unfreeze it because I want to be able to change it. I want to be able to do what I want to be able to do when I want to do it. I don't want to have to wait for anything. I don't want anything to get in the way of my creativity in the moment, because oftentimes that's how things come to me. They come to me very quickly. And if I don't start getting on it right away, I'm most likely going to forget it. Now, you may have a rock solid memory and maybe you'll remember it forever. And I wish I were you if that were the case, but I'm not like that. And so some of you don't mind freezing. Some of you don't mind the hassle of having to go through that. Some of you are probably saying, Barry, what are you talking about? That's not a hassle. Well, it's not a hassle to you. To me, it is. I haven't done it in years. I just refuse to do it anymore because I want to operate. I want to utilize a system that doesn't require me to do that. And so whether or not, whether or not you work that way or not, however you work, I think for many of you, I don't think there's a need for DSP, but for many of us, there certainly is a need for DSP. So once you decide that, hey, if you don't need DSP, well, okay, you've made that decision. It's good for you. Okay, probably end of discussion for you. But if you're interested in DSP, then you've got to start looking at what are some of the pros and cons to the different types of DSP solutions. Now, to my knowledge, today, there's only 2 out there that you can utilize where you do not have to use a front-end GUI. In other words, a new graphic user interface in front of your DAW, making you have to go back and forth between those two, and that, of course, first and foremost would be Pro Tools HDX or Pro Tools Carbon. Okay, so that's kind of a given out there. Let's move on past that. The other one, to my knowledge, the only one that does it is Apogee with Logic. If you're a Logic Pro user, do they even call it Logic Pro anymore? Or whatever, Logic X or whatever it is, Logic. I think they could just call it whatever. Doesn't really matter. That you can utilize their DSP within Logic, and it works similarly to the way it does with Pro Tools HDX or Pro Tools Carbon. And so therefore you're not having to be bothered by that other interface that's in front of the way. I take that back. There is a third one now, and that is Luna Universal Audio with the Apollo series units using Luna. That would be the third one out there that you can do that directly, but you have to use Luna with that. But you could also say, well, Barry, for you to be able to do that with Logic, you got to use Apogee. You could say for you to be able to do that Pro Tools, you got to use HDX or Carbon. So point made, okay? So as long as you're comfortable in that, those are your 3 options to my knowledge. The rest are going to require you to use a separate GUI in front of it where you can instantiate the plugins within the resources of that interface. And so and for most people sitting at home in a project studio, that's really not that big of a deal unless you're like me. I don't want to have to do that, but that's my personal choice. I can understand for many of you why it's not. And so I think these are things that you probably need to consider. If you're mostly doing audio and not a lot of virtual instruments, and you can get everything tracked and then mixed, you really don't need a DSP-based solution. As long as you've got a reasonably powerful computer, you don't need it. When you think about computers like what Apple's doing right now with the M1 processor, that the power of that thing is off the freaking charts, okay? And I have no doubt that AMD and Intel will be coming up with similar processors to be able to be just as powerful as theirs if you're on the Windows side of things. But considering for an entry-level computer that it's blowing away most $3,000 and $4,000 computers as far as a processing power ability, the future's bright for all of us when it comes to that. And so I think we've got to consider that too. So I don't think we're that far away from me being able to say nobody really needs that anymore. I bet you just in a few short years, you'll be able to run a ton of virtual instruments in a session and still keep a low buffer setting because these computers are just going to continue to get more and more powerful. Now, the more and more powerful they get, the more and more developers will take advantage of that power and do better and greater things. So So ultimately, it's a decision for you whether DSP makes sense for you or not. I think I'm at least trying to cover some of the examples, some of the types of things that you have to consider, or you should consider, I should say, in deciding whether, which direction is best for you. Like if you're on the fence right now about purchasing or upgrading your interface, these are some of the things that you should probably consider. I mean, within your price range, if you've got an interface that offers DSP type plugins while tracking, and it's in the same price range as some other interfaces you're considering, I'd say go for the DSP. Better safe than sorry. At least you know you've got it just in case. But certainly as fast as our connections are going with USB-C as well as Thunderbolt and the evolution of all of that, as well as computers getting faster and faster and faster, I think we're going to start to see that really diminish over the next few years. Now, for the record, people have been saying that for the last 15 years, and so we're still not there yet. We're getting close. I'll give it to you there. We're getting close, but we're still not there just yet. Okay. So let's hope we get there, because the more power we have, the more amazing this is. We have the ability to have such amazing tools at a fraction of the cost that they were when I first started doing this many, many decades ago. I don't know if it's many, but a long time ago. Let's just say that. So consider that. Make the decision. Which way is best for you? Put it down in the comments. Tell me whether you think DSP is needed in your studio, not necessarily for everybody else. Please don't try to make decisions for everybody else. Just say for you, you don't have a need for it. Or maybe if you do have you already are using a DSP type solution, whether it's some of the ones I've talked about with Antelope, Apogee, Universal Audio, Pro Tools, and the myriad of others, RME. I mean, I probably could go on and on and on. Metric Halo even has it. So I think ultimately, let us know how that's working for you. If you're having any problems, there's any frustrations that you have, share those with other people. Let other people let's all try to learn from each other in this. And so we can all make better and more informed decisions as we decide where to invest our future money in the gear that we use in our studio. So if you like the topics I talk about on this channel, please hit that like and subscribe button, that notification bell. That's really important. Helps me grow this channel. I want to try and help as many people as I can. Hopefully you guys are finding this interesting. If you do, then click one of those. If you don't, well, just turn me off, because it's okay. You can't hurt my feelings. So until next time, I hope all of you have a great and wonderful day.